Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lady Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Jocelynn Pearl, and today we have not one, but two C-level executives joining us and sharing all about their career journeys and how they got to where they are today. We also get into running a patient-centric biotech with Emily McGinnis. She's from Taysha Therapeutics, and working on De-Extinction, something a little different than patient-focused biotech, with Claire Aldridge, who's the chief strategist at Form Bio, which was spun out of Colossal Biosciences. You might have heard about them in the news recently, as they would like to de-extinct the dodo bird. Very interesting missions and motivations across these two companies, and I think it's a great conversation and you'll learn a lot from their experience. So thanks so much for listening and sharing Lady Scientist Podcast. Awesome. So today we have a first for Lady Scientist Podcast. We actually have two C-level executives joining us today. And this is the first time we've had someone, two guests at this level. And I'm really excited to dive into both Claire and Emily's career journeys, what's led them to their current positions, and also talk a little bit about their experience and what it's like working at these amazing companies. Both Form Bio and Taysha Therapeutics are two companies that I really admire in the space of biotech, and I think are doing really interesting things to advance science in general and also patient advocacy. So I'm excited to jump in. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So let's start off with Emily. We've never had a chief patient advocacy and external affairs officer on the show before. That's such an interesting job title. I'm excited to dive into what that means. Can you walk us through your background and the types of roles that led up to this position?
Sure. Boy, it's been quite a road. I would say I think I have the best job ever in biotech, in that my role allows me to work directly with the communities in the disease states that we're serving. I can tell you a little bit more about that later. But you asked how I got here. I wouldn't have guessed that I'd be in this position, frankly. I feel like I started my career in pharma over 20 years ago in sales. I was a field sales rep for a pretty large pharma company. And then after about 6 or 7 years, I went to a small orphan company that was specializing in neuroscience products. And so I was in sales for a bit, but then that led me to go in-house, where I was worked in several different marketing roles. And in that space, what I'll take a step back and say is that I love science. So I have a bachelor's in education with a concentration in biology. I was a biology major for many years and played around with going into other scientific roles, whether it was in healthcare, and somehow landed on, okay, let me get out with a degree in education, a concentration in biology. And what I found was sales, and then going into marketing, that I could really leverage my education background to help teach science, whether it was to physicians through marketing materials, but a lot of also how do we educate patients and families? So that's the first time when I went into marketing where I thought, wow, there's really such an unmet need to make sure that we understand what the patient needs are, what the caregivers need, in order to understand the products that we're asking them to consider. So at that point in my career, I worked in advocacy, but it was almost under the marketing umbrella. And as my career progressed, that was the first time I worked in the rare disease space. It was in the epilepsy space, and also in neurology, and then for a small biotech. And that's when I fell in love with small biotechs, neurology, and rare, and also advocacy. So since that time, I've been at several different startup companies. one, progressing in my marketing career, but at one point I made a switch and led medical affairs for a while. So I had finished my master's in public health later in life, which helped me expand the science, but also think about how can we educate communities and learn from communities in order to change health outcomes. So that was really rewarding for me. Took that into a medical affairs role, but then shortly after that, went to a small biotech again, the first gene therapy company that I worked at called Avexis. And at Avexis, again, in a small company, I had a number of different hats. I worked in marketing for a while, and then I really focused my efforts on advocacy and government affairs work, where at that point, I realized the importance of having one function that can serve as a strategic partner across the organization to, one, understand the needs of the community, work directly with our patient advocacy groups who know these rare diseases more than anybody else. Oftentimes the physicians don't have as much insight because they're so rare. So in that role, I with my government affairs hat, was able to work on newborn screening initiatives and work on one of the first gene therapies to be launched for spinal muscular atrophy, which was an incredible honor and incredibly rewarding. After my time at Avexis, I was asked to join Taysha, so will be 3 years in April. And I was humbled to be asked to start and really focus at the C-suite level in patient advocacy. And, it was a bit of a shift. So at Avexis, my role was focused on preparing for the approval of our gene therapy and how do we help educate patients and families prior to the approval and after. Whereas at Taysha, we had preclinical programs that we were trying to bring forward to the FDA. And we really embraced at Taysha patient-focused drug development. And so what I spent a lot of time on there, do you want me to pause? Sorry. So I don't know if you can hear the dogs, or is it not? Okay.
I can't hear them very well. No,
good.
but
Okay.
it's all good.
Okay. Sorry. So what being at Taysha allowed me to do was to focus on patient-focused drug development. So as we were bringing preclinical programs into the clinic, we learned directly from our advocacy groups and patients directly what were the outcomes that mattered to them most. So as we were developing our clinical trial protocols, as we're thinking about patient educational materials for them to go into the clinical trial, we're gathering all of that information and ensuring that not only is the patient voice heard when we're having interactions with regulatory bodies, but also we're also taking that information and educating whether it's a PI or a physician about what we've learned from the patients about what they want to know about the clinical trial.
That I think was really interesting at Taysha, if you don't mind my jumping in, was that idea that making sure that when we're designing those endpoints for those clinical trials, they're the things that matter to the families and the patients, because they're the ones that are going to be trusting us to be on the journey to develop these drugs. And so we want to know what would make a difference. Is it keeping them ambulatory? Is it, sight? Like, what are the things that really impact the quality of life for those patients? And how do we keep that at the forefront of what we're trying to develop?
That's so interesting. And as someone who's never worked on this end of drug development, I'm curious, what does it mean? I mean, in addition to clarifying these endpoints for clinical trials, what does it mean to have that patient voice in the room as far as these decisions? Like, are you interviewing these patient advocacy groups and then relaying that information to the team at Taysha and the FDA? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We start with the advocacy groups, and we start by learning from them, what they believe the unmet needs are, what do they think are the most burdensome symptoms, and of course collaborating really closely with our clinical team as they're developing the protocol. So trying to understand what they're planning from literature reviews. And then we actually work with the advocacy groups to recruit patients and caregivers, depending on the situation. Oftentimes,
well, in the focus
yeah,
groups.
then the focus groups, exactly. So we bring the patients in, we invite them for a focus group. We first do some online surveys, and COVID was kind of a cool opportunity to take a different approach. At my time at Avexis, we actually would do a focus group in person for a day, which was wonderful. Well, COVID, we couldn't do that. So what we did was we did this online forum that was allowed the patients or the caregivers to interact with each other. And then we'd bring them together on a focus group where we'd have the clinical team sit in the back room so they could hear what the patients and families were saying. And time again, whether it was at Avexis or at Taysha, the caregivers or patients felt like they were heard, and they really appreciated that we were listening, and they felt like they did have a seat at the table. And we were able to then, follow up and say, thank you, here's what we learned, and summarize that back to them. And it was incredibly rewarding for them. We've even taken some of this, what we've learned, and presented it at some of their patient conferences, and also to different physician groups, so to expand the data out there. But we're definitely connecting directly with the patients. And oftentimes what I hear from the families is they thank us because they feel like they've been heard by us. And it also serves as such a great internal motivator for the team. Yeah.
Well, and when you think about rare disease, you touched on it, Emily, the way that the families know more about these diseases than the doctors do, right? They know more about the gene, they know more about like pedigrees, they know so much. And so it really is important, I think, to have them as part of this process because they really are the experts.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sounds like incredibly rewarding work. I'm curious from more of a business perspective, how decisions are made as far as which diseases to target, because we know that there's so many rare diseases out there. I think on the order of 10,000 potentially different conditions. And a lot of these conditions have very small patient populations. How does a company go about deciding what to focus on and which drugs to work on?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, especially considering the environment that we're in, where funding has not been as great for biotech companies. So typically, drug development in the past was based on numbers, right? To your point, like how many patients can we reach, and what's the unmet need? I know there's been significant change in that realm, given the things out there to help
I think like molecular medicines is what I like to call them, right? Like we're now able to develop disease modifying therapies, gene therapies, potential cures, ASOs, but really addressing that fundamental problem. And I think that has changed what we think about as what's addressable.
Yes, agree. And there's now incentives for small companies to go into the rare disease space, which is amazing. And so oftentimes it's, the science that's out there, is it going to work? And I think that's what's cool about some of these platforms now is we've seen that they can work and see a benefit in the patient population. So it's less about the numbers, and really a lot about the high unmet need and is this feasible? Do we think we can see a benefit in this patient population? Would you agree?
That science path direct? Well, and I think that's like for kind of what I like about this class of drugs versus small molecules is, gene therapy, cell therapy, ASOs, the whole, again, what I call molecular medicines, is the science has been de-risked more than for small molecules. Yeah. And what we have the opportunity to do is to start thinking about how do we make these more cost effective? How do we make them more accessible? get them to people in areas that are not traditionally served by high-end academic medical centers. And so, I think that's the opportunity that we've got here, is we know that a great scientist like a Stephen Gray or a Jim Wilson can design something really clever for these, and then it's a matter of moving it through the approval process. And that's just, to me, there's more opportunity to fundamentally change the course and the trajectory of these diseases.
Yeah. Wow, that's really just exciting and hopeful. And we chat with folks from the rare disease community on the show, and I'm lucky enough to get to see the amazing work that some of these parents of children with rare diseases, some of the work that they're doing to try to advance cures for their children. And I think it's just really encouraging that people on the industry side are thinking about these problems and are hammering away at them. And it isn't just the case that most biotech companies are going after, diseases with huge patient populations, for instance. So that's really exciting. So I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you, Claire, about your role. You're now a chief strategy officer at Form Bio, and I'm just curious what your career journey has looked like and what led you to this new position.
My career journey has been, I've had a variety of different roles. A biotech investor, one of, I always like to joke that you can't really call yourself a biotech investor if you don't have some big things that you passed on. We passed on Avexis probably in 2012, 2013. So I did biotech investing. I've been at a number of startups, and I've also been in the commercialization world at academic medical centers. The place I like to be in is the conversation around how do we understand whether or not this science has an application in the marketplace that makes economic sense as well as an unmet need. I love science like Emily, but I don't want to do science. I love that there are people who want to do science and make those discoveries, but I really like partnering with those people to understand what is a path to put this into the marketplace where it can benefit people and, change outcomes. I definitely believe that we have an obligation to the taxpayers, right, who support our academic medical centers, the NIH, all of these different groups, to try to figure out what is the application of this science, not just the discovery. So that's been the thread that's gone through my career. And I remember when I first met the founding team for Colossal Biosciences, they're working to de-extinct the woolly mammoth, the thylacine, and the recently announced dodo. And it broadened the way I thought about science. I've always been in the human therapeutic space. And, the idea that we can develop science to do something, like this big moonshot, really kind of made me think, let's think about science a little more broadly. And the thing I especially love about Colossal is how many kids now think biology is cool. So that's, I always joke that, I've been working 25 years trying to make people think biology is cool, and they did more in a month. So that's been kind of a little humbling. But what I loved about what they were building, and after my time at UT Southwestern, where I saw a lot of technologies coming into our tech transfer office around bioinformatics, ML, AI, and it was coming in all over campus. The bioinformatics department, sure, but surgery and radiation oncology and neurology and oncology, they were all bringing this IP in that we didn't know what to do with, and there wasn't a path to do something with. And then the Colossal team was building a platform to do a lot of this sophisticated molecular analysis around genomic analysis, variant calling, CRISPR editing, all of this stuff with an ML/AI backdrop, and the recognition that there were other problems that could solve using this platform. And it was fun getting to sit in the room with them and come up with use cases. What are places, if you've been in biology for a long time, we've spent a lot of time thinking that software was going to solve all of these problems, and having biology remind us that it's very complicated and a lot of redundancy and not that simple. But to think about with the advances that we've made in this kind of machine learning, AI, bioinformatics, what are some discrete problems that can be solved with this that are conducive to that kind of solution? And so it was just through those conversations, they're a bunch of software people who are learning science, and I'm a scientist who wanted to learn more about how do we apply these new technologies to problems in biology. Instead of using them to do better targeted ads, which they're very good at, let's try to figure out how to use it to make these kind of drugs that, again, I think can be transformative for so many diseases. How do we make them better? How do we make them more cost effective? How do we take this science and really take it into the clinic in a way that can benefit patients?
It seems like from first blush, Form Bio is working on tools that could have a big impact on the space across multiple companies. Does Form Bio consider itself a tech bio company? And I'm curious how you feel about that term.
We love that term. We definitely consider ourselves a tech bio company. And, we want to bring together the different skill sets. What kind of convinced me to join the company was the fact that we had an amazing team of bioinformatics PhDs, amazing team of PhDs in ML and AI, and then an amazing team of user experience and programming and making products that have been very successful products. And the marriage of those three areas was very interesting to me. The idea of bringing different expertise, putting everybody, I kind of like to think of it as like everybody shook their backpack out on the table, and then we saw what was there. And it was something that was different and solving some problems in the space that haven't really been solved before. Biology has not really had that sophisticated, intuitive user interface. People who want to do bioinformatics or this kind of work, they have to learn programming, Python. If they want to do their image development, R Shiny, those kind of things. Like, let's make all of that drag and drop. Let's make wizards and do this kind of stuff that some of these people honed these skills making incredibly addictive video games. So they know how to make a sticky product. Let's use that in a way that allows scientists to move their science forward faster.
It's a very exciting goal. I just think the space of science in general has been starved of that high quality software product and user experience like you spoke about. And I was just talking about this last night, where when I was in graduate school, Benchling first became available as a electronic lab notebook. There were, of course, other products in that space and still are, but it's become one of the more dominant electronic lab notebooks because of its user interface and having a little bit of a cleaner look as a piece of software. But there really haven't been a lot of major players in this space. And so I think that's why the meme of tech bio is exciting, and hopefully companies like yours continue to make some headway in this space. I want to ask, because I've heard people speak about some of the challenges and differences culturally of these different types of teams, right? People who work in software, they're used to moving fast and breaking things. It's a very different state of mind than for those of us who work on drug development and are hoping to, work on products that help patients and improve their lives. So I'm just curious to hear your perspectives as far as, this new team that you're on, how that kind of contrasts to working at Taysha, and maybe if Emily wants to share anything as well about her experience with that.
Absolutely. It's interesting because they do want to move fast and break things, and science doesn't move fast, kind of by definition. But I think the thing that has been really interesting to watch scientists get a little more comfortable with the way programming kind of works now in these 2-week sprints, and you want a minimal viable product, and kind of breaking things down into smaller chunks that are more achievable. I think that keeps scientists a little more optimistic and motivated. And then, just that doing that hard work to say, what do we need to do to show that this works, that we can feel confident about it? Scientists tend to want to go all the way to the end. before they even want to tell anybody about it. And culturally, just bringing in this different way of doing things and helping them understand that we can break this down into smaller projects that then lead to something that we're proud of and comfortable sharing with the world, even if it's not done yet. And so that's been a culturally something, and sometimes we have to remind the scientists, like, no, this is okay. This is totally okay to think about it like this. But bringing that kind of perspective into biology has been interesting. Emily, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. The thing that came to mind is having worked in a little bit different, but having worked in big pharma versus small pharma, I feel like the thing I love about these small biotech companies that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years is early on, you have a small team, so you're very nimble. You can move very quickly. And I see that at what we've done at Taysha, what we did at Avexis as well. It's really a roll up your sleeves environment. There might be, there's something that needs to get done. It's like, well, you throw your hat in and I'll work on that. I would say what's been such a pleasure at Taysha is throughout the company, everybody's embraced patient centricity as a culture. I'll be honest, in my career as pushing the role of advocacy and including the patient, it was tough early on because, people didn't understand, well, if we ask them, what if we don't do what they say? Kind of that same education. It's like, well, that's okay. We're asking for their opinion, and we'll let families know that sometimes we can't, always, respond in that way. But it's been very refreshing at Taysha because cross-functionally, Claire saw it, from our regulatory colleagues, our the scientists, and even you see it working with UT Southwestern. The team there is so involved in patient advocacy, and that's one of the groups we partner with from a scientific perspective. And it's been very.
The entire UT Southwestern Medical Center is celebrating Rare Disease Day.
Yeah,
they've got a selfie station to stand with your stripes.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I love that. Yeah, they are, they're amazing. So it's been, so for me, it's like that. It's so great to have that patient-centric culture where you have people even in finance or IT or, other groups who are just want to learn from the patients, because that helps them really rally around what we're doing. So love that.
Kind of going back to my investing days and my tech transfer days, one of the things you see a lot in this space is you see a lot of really cool science that people are really excited about that don't actually solve a problem in the marketplace, but people get distracted by how cool it is. And I think about that a lot as, solutions in search of a problem. And I think when you bring the patients into the conversation, you're not a solution in search of a problem anymore. You're actually going to find out what the problem is. Exactly. And I think that talking to that end user, anytime you start up a company, you do that customer discovery, right? What do you need? What do you want? And I think when you talk about drug discovery and drug development for these rare diseases, the customer discovery are those families. And how do you say, I want to solve these problems, but I need to know which of these problems are the ones that really matter to you?
Totally. So true.
I love that. It's almost like in this space, you're deferring to the actual problem and the patient community, and really focusing on how you can have an impact in that space, which is also the space I like to work in. So I really appreciate hearing those thoughts. I'm curious because it seems to me, as someone who's more at the mid-level manager setting, I'm a senior scientist at a biotech company. You both have gone through some interesting transitions. It seems like you both are flexible in some way. You've kind of shifted gears a couple times in your career. Can you talk about that mindset of flexibility and adaptability, and how that has led to you now being in these C-level positions that you're at?
I can start.
Absolutely.
Like I said,
Go ahead.
like I said,
you should probably do a podcast on that.
Oh, totally. I think I never went into my career saying, this is what I want to do. I always hated the question that they'd ask you on the performance review or goal setting to say, what do you want to do in 5 years? I don't know. I guess you said it very nicely. It is the flexibility mindset, but for me, it's also just being open. And maybe that's part of it. Just being open to what comes. I found throughout my career, I've followed really great people. So, I think I've had the great pleasure of working with people that, and that I've been connected with that maybe have gone to a new startup and they're like, hey, come do this. I'm like, okay. Or, I think about my time doing medical affairs. That was an opportunity because no one was really doing the job in this small startup. There wasn't a position there. And I went to our CMO and I'm like, kind of need a head of medical affairs. Can I help you there? And she's like, sure. So for me, it's I guess a balance of, you're right, having a flexible mindset, not having a set idea of what I want to do, and seeing an opportunity and saying, hey, I can make this work. And it goes to just, and I think that some things that's hard for people to do, and in particular, I think women, is to then ask for those opportunities. And it'll surprise you because they come true. Yeah.
Yeah. So similar, I think, being open to, kind of agree with what Emily had said, but I think too, it is about taking the opportunities that come their way and making sure that you're still learning and you're still able to be curious. So curiosity has really driven a lot of my career. Well, that looks like something I don't know anything about. And I think I could learn it. And, I often think about things in 2-year increments. The first year is learning it, the second year is mastering it, and then thinking about where do you want to go with it. And you can't master all things in 2 years, but to really think about it from that perspective, am I still learning? Am I still growing? Is it still meeting my need to be curious and to solve problems? And that's what I really like to do. And so it's a lot of taking the opportunities that come your way and then figuring out how to make the most of them, how to make them bigger than they were even originally. And again, that goes to Emily's point. You have to ask for that. But people are very willing to allow you to have those additional responsibilities, especially if at a startup where you have to wear lots of hats. But I think for me, I've had great luck working for people who appreciated that I wanted to keep growing and wanted to keep learning, and they worked hard to be my champion. And I think that's something to share with young women, that it's great to have a mentor. It's wonderful, but it's even more important to have a champion, somebody who is internal, whether it's to your organization or to another organization that you hope to one day go to be advocating on your behalf when you're not in the room.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Claire, but I still say I don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh, my mom says I don't have to grow up till she does, and so I'm golden, right? Well, and I think I don't want to stop learning. When I stop learning, when I stop being curious, then I probably need to step away and get out of other people's way.
Yeah, I love that.
I love those responses. I'm learning so much from both of you. I want to dig into the transitions a little bit more, because you've both been at multiple companies. What led to you knowing it was time to move on? Or, were there particular, is there a particular instance you can think back to where you thought it's time for me to take on this next step, and that will, provide XYZ. I'm just curious if you could walk us through like how you handle those types of decisions, because obviously you both, I'm sure, are approached for opportunities all the time. And I think that's another thing to kind of keep in balance over the course of a career is, how much time or loyalty you're giving to a particular company or team. So I'd love to learn from your experience with that.
I can share a little bit first that one of the things I made a few mistakes early in my career where I chased either a title or money or something like that. And it really led me, because then I had to unravel that. And it really led me to defining what it was that I wanted to have as my guiding principle, right? Like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I know what my guiding principle is. And that is, I want to be a translator of science between scientists and non-scientists that ultimately keeps in mind the impact to the patient, to whoever. So it's allowed me to do different jobs that maybe you wouldn't have thought were a good fit, but it allowed me to do that. And so once I made that guiding principle, I could hold jobs up to that. And then the older I get and the more wisdom I accumulate, I think a big part of it is, and and Emily mentioned she's worked with the same people on multiple occasions. I've worked with the same people on multiple occasions as well. You really learn when you're with a good team and you're on a good team, you want to make that magic happen again. And so there might be a time where you move on from that opportunity because it makes sense at the time and you need to go get some additional skill sets or additional experience. But when you have some people that you really enjoy working with, that you enjoy solving problems, and you enjoy having what I like to call respectful disagreement, to be able to talk through areas of different points of view with understanding their perspective and coming to a consensus, it really makes for a delightful workday.
I agree. I think I've always said that you could work at the greatest company, and that you could have a team though that isn't collegial, isn't easy to work with, and you could be miserable. And so I like your idea of a guiding principle, Claire. We'll talk more about that later. I might think about that. For me, it's been...
Well, my other one is that I'm a friendly immunologist. That's my other guiding principle, and everyone needs one.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And, for me, though, a couple of things, I'm a big believer of going with your gut and trusting your instincts. One of the hardest jobs that I did leave was Avexis. We had been acquired by Novartis. And the thing that I've learned about myself through that experience was reinforcing that I really appreciate, enjoy being within a small biotech. And Novartis coming in was amazing for the company, amazing for the community. But as things moved on, I realized that the culture, the environment wasn't as the fit that I was looking for. And I say it was really hard to leave because I had become incredibly connected, not only to the advocacy groups that I worked with. I was doing great work in newborn screening. And also, we really connected with the patient communities. But I realized after taking time, listening to my instincts and then being, that it was time for me to move on, and that was a tough decision because great things were happening. It just wasn't the right fit for me as the company evolved. And that's it was a tough decision to make. And I put a lot of thought into that as well. But I guess it goes back to, I always say, trust your instincts, trust your gut. You have to give it some time and sit with it. And then you'll know what the right next move and right path. I always feel like once one opportunity closes, whether you close it yourself or it's closed, another way, then there's always something better around the corner. And in hindsight, you learn something about that past experience. So I've never regretted some of the moves that I've made in my career. I feel like they kind of one builds upon another to bring me where. So it'll be interesting to see, I don't know,
where the rest of it goes.
Yeah, where it goes. Yeah.
Well, I think for people where you are in your career, I think appreciating that it's not necessarily linear the way it used to be, right? When you chose to go to this college, that meant you didn't go to this other college. When you chose this PhD program or this PI for your PhD, that means you didn't choose somebody else. But when you get to where you are now, where Emily and I are, you make a choice and you can pivot. And I think that just an appreciation of that each decision is not the final decision, and that even if it doesn't work out, you can learn something from it. And maybe all you learned is what you don't want to do, but that's still knowledge, right? It's a nice negative experiment. And that you can then continue to grow and figure out what you do want to do.
That's great advice, and it reminds me of some of the sentiments from a book I read this year, 4,000 Weeks, where he quotes some philosophers around, choice and contrasting choosing something over this like fear of missing out that a lot of people suffer from, where they feel incapacitated to make decisions. And his point is kind of that when we choose one thing, we're that's a sign of love, that's a sign of devotion, and that has value, like, because we have a finite number of days and a finite number of weeks, we have to make decisions about what we're going to spend our time doing, and there can be beauty in that, right? So I really love that. So I'd love to talk about some of your career highlights, some of the scientific or clinical highlights. Maybe you can think back to a particular day when a drug got approved, or you got to make that call to that patient advocacy group. If you could just share an anecdote like that with us, that would be great. Maybe we can start with Emily.
Yeah, I will say the most rewarding, gosh, there's been many, but when I was at Avexis, when we were able to reach out to the families that participated in our phase 1 trial, we reached out, had phone conversations with them. That was so heartwarming. But then we brought them all in person to meet with them, to understand what they learned in the clinical trial. And they brought their kids. And meeting these kids that had been dosed with gene therapy, that in the transformational impact it had on their lives, was so incredibly rewarding. That would be number one. Second to that, I mentioned earlier that I worked on newborn screening. So with SMA, these kids are born, and for all rare diseases, there's this diagnostic odyssey where patients are going from doctor to doctor trying to figure out what their kids are what their diagnosis is. Well, for SMA, along with our advocacy partners and parents, we pulled together, we were able to work towards bringing newborn screening on the national panel. And when that news came through, that again was incredibly rewarding, because what it meant is it set the path for screening at each state. And to look back now, that almost, I think actually all states are screening for SMA, these parents don't have to go through this diagnostic odyssey now, is incredibly rewarding to me.
Emily's career has been much more rewarding than mine. Mine has been
I doubt that.
at a different level, but similarly, the venture fund I was with, our very first investment was a company called Peloton Therapeutics, and it was Peloton, the drug company, not Peloton the bikes, and they were acquired by Merck. But a similar thing, that was a drug that I've been in Dallas for a very long time. UT Southwestern is an institution I love greatly. And that was a perfect example of the virtuous cycle that should happen at every academic medical center, where the target was identified by a researcher, a researcher in the cancer center. That target went over to the high throughput screening lab in the biochemistry department. They found some hits. Nothing like a development candidate or a lead, but those hits went into a company. The company developed that, did medicinal chemistry, opened a trial. That trial then came back to UT Southwestern and benefited the patients there, and then ultimately was approved for one indication so far, many more to come, I imagine. And that it's a novel mechanism addressing the lack of oxygen. It's HIF2 alpha hypoxia induced factor. that tumors have. And so, even during the development of that, it was hard to get to a maximum tolerated dose because it's not turned on unless you have hypoxia. So just getting to be part of that whole circle, that virtuous cycle of what we love that happens when our researchers are informed by the clinic and then, can develop something that can then come back to the clinic.
Wow, really incredible experiences that you both have had in your careers, and I love hearing highlights. I think it's always important to remind folks why we're doing what we're doing. Just the other day, there was a video shared of a child with a rare disease named Ryan who recently received a gene therapy in Poland, and she's able to sit up for the first time and, start having these, developmental milestones that she was never able to have before. And it's just so inspiring to see progress being made in this space. I want to caveat that with the incredible challenge that comes with gene therapy that I think many scientists in this space are aware of, but perhaps people outside of the space don't always appreciate. And that is the delivery challenges of things like AAV gene therapy and the manufacturing challenges. So I'm curious if either of you, I know, Claire, you recently spoke about this. And I'm sure, Emily, you're quite familiar with it at Taysha, but if you could just maybe talk through some of the hurdles that come with taking on developing a therapy in this space of AAV and gene therapy.
Absolutely, Emily. I'll jump in first since this is part of forms, and really this problem, knowing that it needed to be solved. Going back to the statement of problems that need solving. It was through my work at Taysha that helped me learn and understand that there was this need, that our manufacturing process right now is basically a translation from the academic world, and we haven't done the optimization, we haven't done some of the other work to kind of really scale up this manufacturing process. And as a result, the products, we don't have standardization in that process, and you've probably heard the process is the product. And we really at Form believe that we need to start to think about how do we make these for manufacturing, how do we improve the quality of the things that are going into the bioreactors, because you're taking this from a small benchtop bioreactor for animal studies to these 2,000 liters. And all of this is it's a numbers game, right? Like it's how many times can you replicate your payload so that you will get that into this self-assembling viral particle? And it's not like, it's kind of like if you threw all the Legos on the floor and then shook the floor, what would you get? It's not this intentional piece by piece that we're used to doing in our manufacturing process. So I think if we're going to see the true potential of these drugs, of this molecular revolution for these advanced biologics, gene therapy, cell therapy, RNA-based therapies, we're going to have to bring some rigor to that manufacturing process and start to look at it to say, how do we get more doses and safer doses? We need to have less partially filled particles in there. Those are a lot harder to process out as part of the purification process because it's not as dramatic as empty and full. So we need to improve that so we have more full particles, so that the patient is not getting a lot of non-therapeutic particles that their immune system is going to recognize anyway.
You beautifully captured the manufacturing process, which is not my expertise. So I'm glad you captured that one, Claire. And I'll just speak to one of the comments you made, Jocelynn, related to the idea that going from research into the clinic, or even especially to the clinic to approval, is a long process. And what I often hear from patient groups and families is there's a lot of excitement when they learn that, let's say, UT Southwestern, or even a company's working on a compound in a preclinical space, I think that they're anxious for timelines. They want to know, and I heard, I think it was Steve Gray say at UT Southwestern, well, science is messy, right? You're doing your best to develop the construct that you think might work, but along the way you're learning, which might help you improve that construct. So from a patient perspective and a broader, I think they look at the idea around and Zolgensma for SMA, which I worked on, and they don't realize the long path it took to get there from R&D and then through the clinical trials. So it takes time. But it's incredibly hard to communicate that to families who have no hope at all, right? And so how one of the things I work on the ASGCT Patient Outreach Committee, and they've done some great work around educating patient, families and caregivers and patients around the gene therapy development process, and that it does take time and it's incredibly complex. And bringing it back to the manufacturing piece, oftentimes you have to do confirmatory trials once you think about the type of manufacturing that you'll need for commercial product. So I love the work that you guys are doing, Claire, that to hopefully make that easier, so that when you do go into that first clinical trial, you're thinking about, okay, this is the process we want to use. This is the right way to go about it. So
I'm curious. I imagine that you both have a lot of people reach out, patients who are seeking potential therapies that you might not be working on or you might not have direct access to or information for. Where do you point them? Are there particular resources or organizations that you say, hey, you should go check this out as a potential tool for them?
There's a group here in Dallas with some moms, some rare disease moms. It's called Rare Village. And, that's their mission now. They know through the journeys that they've gone on how hard it was to get started. And so their goal now is to be the place where you can come and get a toolkit, kind of like, so you've just gotten a devastating diagnosis. Here's how to start navigating that. Everything from the science that you now need to become an expert in and seeking the clinical care to you think you might want to fundraise around this, like just helping these families, especially for diseases where they're very new, there aren't many patients who've even had that mutation identified, and the work that they're doing. And it's some rare disease moms that we know through Stephen Gray's work at UT Southwestern. But that's a great organization, and that's their goal, is to try to give these other families a leg up that they learned through trial and error. But if they can make it easier for the next family, that's what they want to do.
That is one amazing organization, because there's a lot of different groups out there, but I love what Rare Village is doing, to your point, Claire, because they've been through this as parents and coming where both children had genetic diagnosis that they didn't know anything about, and they had to learn along the way. Some other groups that I'll point people to, one, if there is a disease group that's already been formed, I'll point them in that direction. But other groups that are a bit bigger would be Global Genes has some really great resources, as well as NORD. And then, from a gene therapy perspective, I think ASGCT has done a really nice job of creating patient educational materials as well. There's also this group called the Courageous Parents Network, and each has their own little flavor. So the Courageous Parents Network also has some nice resources and support for families.
Well, and Casey McPherson's group down in Austin, he's got a lab that he's working on. His daughter, Takira Rose, is his foundation.
Yeah.
He's got
Everloom Bio, I think, is his company.
Yes. He's a delightful man and a fantastic singer-songwriter.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that about him. That's very cool. I've heard him speak on, there used to be a Clubhouse, Gene Fixers Clubhouse show. Not sure if they've moved it somewhere else, but yeah, some great folks in that community, Ethan Perlstein as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you want to just any shout outs? Where can people find you? Yeah, anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
Oh, absolutely. Form Bio spun out of Colossal, the De-Extinction company, but we're really committed to improving molecular medicines and how we can make better, safer molecular medicines. You can find us at formbio.com, and we'll be at ASGCT as well as SynBio Beta. And we're really excited about the future of tech bio.
Awesome. And what about you, Emily?
So if you want to learn more about Taysha and the work we're doing, we have a website, taysagtx.com, again, focusing on neurological conditions using an AAV9 vector. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn as well. So
Same.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link all of the resources and websites you guys mentioned. And I learned so much from you both today. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights with our listeners. And I can't wait to share this with everyone. So thank you so much for being here.
Jocelynn, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure. Always fun to get together with Claire and with you too now, Jocelynn. This was fun.
Yeah. That wraps up my interview with Emily McGinnis and Claire Aldridge. I learned so much from their experience, and I hope you did too. If you enjoyed the topic of working on rare diseases, please check out my previous interview with Madeline Oden. She's a researcher at Tufts University. And thanks so much for listening to Lady Scientist Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. We really appreciate it. So thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.